Alrighty, so now we are simply going to look at flip zones that also sweep liquidity. So it's the exact same concept, exact same theory of what we look for with the structure zones that sweep liquidity. We're simply looking for, did the flip sweep liquidity in the creation of the zone? Okay, did it grab some liquidity as it was being formed? That's it. Because remember, what's the reasoning we're doing behind that? We are looking for where potentially institutions used available liquidity, so I'll get into this in a minute, but behind a high to enter the market. It's like another filter that perhaps means institutions were involved in the creation of that, okay? So not only did it break structure, not only did it take out another zone, but it also used liquidity as it was formed, okay? It's another little filter that we add on top, all right? So before we kind of dive into all of this, you've probably seen all of these variations and all of these ridiculous names, and you don't need to memorize any of this. The names don't really mean anything, as in, this is just some rubbish I came up with to try and separate them. But essentially, I view all of this as the same, okay? And you don't need to picture it. I'll make it hopefully reasonably simple for you as we get into it, okay? So let's start here with the left-hand side, which is what we've been looking at before we got to the liquidity module, right? Which is simply just a standard flip zone, okay? So we'll start with demand. So price is moving to the upside, okay? This low breaks this high. So what does that create? It creates a demand zone, right? That led to the break of that structure. So then if demand, let's get my paintbrush, if demand is going to be able to do its job, right? What should happen? Price should come into the demand zone. It should react. The reaction is key. Obviously price reacts in this instance. And if demand is going to do its job, it should move price to make a higher high, right? It should break structure. But as we can see, it doesn't break the high. It doesn't form a higher high. And then price moves to the downside. So what that means now is supply has stepped in and it's overpowered demand. Okay, so we've had a reaction from demand. That reaction has failed to do its job. And then price is broken and closed below the reaction. Okay, so when we get a break below there, that's when the reaction has failed. But we only get true confirmation that the zone has completely failed when price actually trades through it. Okay, so we get a failed reaction there when price moves below the reaction, but we wait for the actual whole zone to fail, right? And then that's when we get in this case, the shift in structure as well. Okay, so I'll go over it. We get the reaction to demand, the reaction fails to do its job, price has a failed reaction, then the zone fails and structure fails at the same time, okay? So now you have a demand to supply flip, okay? So anywhere from the low of the reaction, okay, to the top of the reaction, that's where we can draw on our demand to supply flip range, right? Anywhere within that range. And then like I've done here, we can obviously refine it to the pivot zone within that, right? 1 or 2 candles or whatever. Okay, so that's the standard flip zone. And then obviously the same for supply to demand, where price comes into supply, it fails to do its job, it fails to make a lower low, and then we get the failed reaction, the failed zone, and the structure shift in this case, right? And then we look to enter on the supply that caused that to happen, okay? Now, in this instance, what do I call it? A no sweep flip, because it doesn't sweep any liquidity in the creation of the zone, right? The flip doesn't sweep any highs. If you look at where all the highs are, right, in here, at no point or within the flip does that get swept, right? So when price comes down here and you're looking for, this is the flip, did it sweep any high? Well, it didn't sweep that high, and there's nothing here, and there's no highs here. It's just a straight movement up and down, right? So just price comes in, price comes up, there's no highs that it breaks, and then price comes down. So when you're looking down here and you look up at this flip, did it sweep any liquidity? No. Whereas now when we look at the flip zones or the sweep flips, they all did, right? It's the same thing. We have demand, price comes into demand, the reaction is key. But in that pullback, right, in the reaction, what does it have? It forms, I guess you could call it like an internal high within there, right? So price moves down and then price sweeps the liquidity that would have built behind that high, right? And then we get the movement to the downside, okay? So then when you're looking at this flip here, whether you take the whole range or you just refine it to the pivot like I have here, and you're looking left, what has it done? It's swept the liquidity behind that high, okay? And these are all just variations of that. So this one, basically the same thing. We come into demand, we react, but rather than just one little high, we get some equal highs, right, that build up. So we know there'll be some, double tops, lower time frame traders, whatever, trading that range. Liquidity gets swept, and then boom, we get the demand to supply flip. Likewise here, this one we get an initial reaction from demand, okay, fails to put in a higher high. Price moves down, but we haven't quite failed the zone yet or broken structure, and then price moves up again. And what does it do? It grabs the liquidity behind the high from the initial reaction, and then we get the movement, okay? So we assume that An institution probably stepped in here to overpower demand, and it used the liquidity behind that high from the initial reaction, right? And then last one here, so again, very, very similar. It doesn't really make a difference. It's just a high was swept in the creation of the zone, right? We come in before we react to that demand or the pivot demand, we have a little bit of a pullback. Then we get the reaction from the demand zone we're looking at. And that reaction fails to put in a higher high, right? It fails to do its job, but it sweeps the liquidity behind that little high there, right? Institution steps in, use the liquidity behind that high to overpower demand and break structure. And that's it. And now we have another sort of variation of, and there's probably other variations, right? These are just kind of the few obvious ones. But all that matters is when you're at this point here, okay, and you're looking at a flip, what you're doing, you're just looking at, okay, there's your supply zone, it flipped demand and broke structure. So I'm going to get short. You're going to be doing it at the exact same point here. The only difference is you're just asking yourself is, when that flip formed there, did it sweep any liquidity to the left? Yeah, it grabbed the liquidity there. When you're here, okay, it's a flip. Did it sweep any liquidity? Yeah, it swept those equal highs. You're looking down here and just asking yourself, okay, there's a flip, I can identify it. Did it sweep some liquidity when it was formed? Yeah, right? Down here again, you're just looking, okay, yeah, it swept some liquidity there. That's it. So I personally view all of these as the same. It's just a flip that swept liquidity, right? I don't necessarily view any on their own as any higher probability than the other. Now, some of you might want to be very strict with all of these different ones and you might want to click stats on them. But for me personally, I view them all as the same, okay? And then likewise, we'll quickly just go over the opposite. You essentially have price come into supply, it reacts, it fails to put in a lower low, but in the pullback of that reaction, what does it do? There's some liquidity here. Now, one question some of you may have is, how strong is this low, right? This low didn't break any structure at all. So how much liquidity is behind that? Yeah, maybe not a lot, but for me, that is enough for it to be classified as a flip that sweeps liquidity, okay? So for some of you, you may view like a flip like this as higher probability because technically this low did break at least some structure, right? It broke that high there. So arguably there's more liquidity behind that low than there is behind this little weak internal low there, right? In theory, right? That makes sense. But I personally haven't necessarily viewed this as any more higher probability than this. Like I said, right? I just keep my trading somewhat simple. I know some people are probably thinking it's not simple at all. That's a totally fair assumption, right? But I view all of these as a flip that sweeps liquidity, okay? So like I said, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by this. It looks like a lot of variations and probably a bit weird to get your head around, but you are literally just looking for a flip like we have done before. But in this bit here, you're just looking at, where the zone is, did it grab any liquidity to the left, in a formation of it? And that's it. And then we simply just say, rather than just a flip, we call it a sweep flip, okay? Maybe you've got a better name than me, but that just makes it easy enough, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. We're simply just looking for, remember, the philosophy of what we always bring it back to is we're looking at a zone. We can ask ourselves questions of what are the odds that an institution was involved in the creation of it? Did it break structure? Yes. Did it overpower another zone? Yes. And was liquidity swept within it? Okay. So looking for sweep zones, it's just another filter to increase the probability of the zone. It's not a necessary requirement, okay? Necessarily, it may depend on what your plan is, but for me, it just needs to have at least broken structure, okay? Cool, let's go look at some real examples.